The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not a special Tuesday. Just quiet, gray, and slow. It sat in the mailbox longer than it should have. I could tell, because the edges were soft, like it had been waiting too. I didn't pick it up right away. I stood there for a moment, staring at my own name. Full name. Spelled right. Haven't seen it written like that in years. Funny thing is, nobody really writes letters anymore. Bills come online. News comes fast. But this felt different. I took it inside and set it on the kitchen table. Didn't open it. Made myself coffee first. Because some habits don't go away, no matter how old you get. The house was quiet. Not lonely. Just settled. Like it knew how to keep secrets. I finally opened the envelope. Slow. Careful. As if the paper might break if I rushed it. Dear Mr. Harris, it began. Formal. Polite. Almost nervous. They were writing about a property. A house. A small one, on a street I hadn't walked in decades. According to their records, my name was still connected to it. That stopped me. Still connected. I leaned back in the chair and let that sit for a while. Because I was pretty sure I'd left that life behind. Packed it up. Closed the door. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere, a dog barked. Life kept moving, like it always does. But right there, at that kitchen table, time slowed down. Because a place I hadn't thought about in years was suddenly calling my name again. I read the letter again. Slower this time. They wanted a response. No pressure. No deadlines written in bold. Just a quiet request. To confirm whether I was still around. Still around. That made me smile. Just a little. I folded the letter. And placed it back on the table. I didn't know what to feel yet. Curious. Careful. And a little tired. If I'm being honest. That house was supposed to be finished business. Sold. Forgotten. Left behind with old furniture. And even older memories. I stood up. And walked to the window. The neighborhood outside looked nothing like the one in my head. Different cars. Different faces. Same sky. Funny how the sky never really changes much. My reflection in the glass surprised me. Older, sure. Lines around the eyes. But still me. I remembered the last day. I stood in that house. Keys on the counter. One last look down the hallway. Telling myself I wouldn't miss it. Turns out, the mind has a way of keeping things, even when you don't ask it to. I picked the letter up again. This time, my hand didn't shake. That felt like progress. Maybe it was nothing. Just paperwork. Just a formality. Or maybe it was one of those moments that arrives quietly and changes the direction of your week, your month, sometimes more. I took a deep breath and nodded to myself. All right. I'd respond. Not today, but soon. Because some doors don't slam shut. They wait. I made coffee and let it sit untouched. The smell filled the room, warm and familiar. But my mind was already somewhere else. Back at that house. Back at the quiet mornings, when the floorboards creaked before the sun came up. Back when time felt slower, almost polite. I sat down, elbows on the table, and stared at the letter again. The paper felt thin. Too thin for the weight it carried. It mentioned a date. Just a date. No explanation. No emotion. Still, my chest tightened a little. I thought about all the reasons not to go. Too far. Too late in life. Too much history. Then I thought about the reasons to go. That list was shorter, but heavier. Sometimes one reason is enough. I laughed softly at myself. Here I was, acting like this was some big dramatic crossroads. When really, it was just an invitation to look back. But looking back isn't always about regret. Sometimes it's about understanding why you became the person you are now. Outside, a car passed by slowly. Somebody's radio played an old song. One I hadn't heard in years. It hit me right there. That feeling of recognition. Like bumping into an old friend at the grocery store. And realizing you still remember their voice. I folded the letter neatly this time. No rush. No frustration. Just acceptance. All right, I thought. I'll go. Not to fix anything. Not to reopen wounds. Just to see. Because some places don't ask you to return. They wait. Until you're ready. I stood up slowly and walked toward the window. The glass was cool under my fingertips. The street looked ordinary. Mailboxes. Parked cars. A dog tugging its owner forward like it had somewhere important to be. Funny how life keeps moving. Even when your thoughts are standing still. I wondered how many people passed that old house every day. Without knowing what it once meant to someone like me. Without knowing how much living had happened inside those walls. There was a time when I thought leaving meant winning. Packing up. Starting fresh. Never looking back. That's what everyone said back then. Don't get stuck. Keep moving. Bigger is better. And I listened. But nobody really tells you that memories don't stay put. They travel light. They follow you quietly. Years go by. Careers happen. People come and go. And one random morning, a simple letter can knock the breath right out of you. I checked the date again. Still there. Still waiting. I felt older in that moment. Not tired. Just aware. Aware that time doesn't ask permission. aware that chances don't repeat themselves loudly. They whisper. I picked up my phone, scrolled through contacts, and stopped. There were names I hadn't spoken to in years. Some I probably never would again. Life does that. It edits your circle without asking. I slipped the letter into my jacket pocket. It rested right over my chest. Heavy. Steady. Certain. Whatever waited at the end of that road. I knew one thing now. Ignoring it would feel worse than facing it. I didn't tell anyone about the letter. Some things feel quieter when they stay personal. I grabbed my keys and paused by the door. That small pause said more than any speech ever could. The mirror by the hallway caught my reflection. A little more gray. Lines I didn't remember earning. But the same eyes. Still curious. Still cautious. I nodded to myself, almost like an agreement. Not a promise. Just a decision. Outside, the air felt different. Not colder. Not warmer. Just expectant. I locked the door and stood there for a moment longer. Listening. Breathing. Letting the weight of it settle. This wasn't about rewriting the past. That chapter was already printed, bound, and shelved. This was about reading it once more. Slowly. With understanding. Some roads don't disappear. They wait patiently. Covered in dust and years. Until you're finally willing to walk them again. I took my first step toward the car. Feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear. Not excitement. Clarity. Whatever I'd find, I would meet it as I am now. Not as the person I used to be. The engine started softly. No drama. No rush. Just forward motion. And as I pulled away from the curb, I realized the journey had already begun. The moment I opened that letter. The drive felt longer than it should have. Not because of distance, but because every mile stirred something old. The road stretched out ahead, familiar and strange at the same time. Gas stations I didn't recognize. Billboards advertising things I didn't need. Yet somehow, it all felt connected. I turned the radio on low. An old station played soft classics. The kind that never rush you. I let it play. Silence didn't need company today. But it didn't mind music either. As the city thinned out, my thoughts grew louder. I remembered leaving this place. How sure I had been. How convinced I was that I'd never look back. I thought growing older would mean becoming certain. Clear answers. Firm beliefs. Instead, it brought questions. Gentler ones. But deeper. The road narrowed. Trees lining both sides like quiet witnesses. Their branches leaned in slightly. As if listening. I slowed down without meaning to. Something about this stretch of road demanded respect. This was where conversations used to happen. Long ones. uncomfortable ones. The kind you don't escape by changing lanes. I rolled the window down. The air smelled like earth and leaves. Simple. Honest. A sign appeared ahead. Weathered. Faded letters. Easy to miss. I missed it once. Then stopped. I backed up slowly. Read it again. That was it. The turn I used to take every morning. Without thinking. Funny how muscle memory outlives memory itself. I signaled. Turned the wheel. And felt my chest tighten just a little. This road didn't lead forward. It led inward. The tires crunched softly against the gravel. That sound alone brought back more memories than I expected. I hadn't heard it in years. That slow, uneven rhythm that tells you you're no longer in a hurry. The road curved gently, like it knew where it was going, and didn't feel the need to prove it. Houses appeared farther apart now. Some freshly painted. Some holding on to their age with quiet pride. I wondered who lived in them these days. Who laughed in those kitchens? Who argued softly at night? Who sat alone on porches, watching time pass? I passed the old grocery store. Or what used to be one. Now it was something else. Something modern. Something efficient. I smiled at that. Progress has a way of changing clothes. Without asking permission. My foot eased off the gas again. Not because of traffic. Because of memory. There was the bend in the road, where I once pulled over. Heart racing. Trying to decide whether to stay or go. I remembered gripping the steering wheel so hard. My hands hurt. Back then, everything felt urgent. Everything felt final. Now, it felt different. Not smaller. Not weaker. Wiser. The past didn't shout anymore. It spoke in calm sentences. It waited for me to listen. Another familiar landmark appeared. The old water tower. Still standing. Still watching over the town like a patient guard. I breathed out slowly. Long. Unforced. I wasn't coming back to relive anything. I was coming back to understand it. And for the first time since the drive began, I felt ready. The closer I got, the quieter everything became. No traffic noise, no hurry, no edge. Even the sky seemed softer here. Wide. Patient. Unbothered by deadlines. I passed the park where weekends used to disappear. The swings were still there. New paint. Same chains. I remembered sitting on one of those benches, pretending to listen, while secretly planning my escape. Back then, leaving felt brave. Staying felt like settling. Funny how perspective ages you. Before time ever does. A pickup truck rolled by slowly. The driver lifted 2 fingers off the wheel. I nodded back without thinking. Some habits never leave. They just wait for the right place to show up again. I checked the mirror, half expecting to see the younger version of myself, sitting in the back seat, arms crossed, impatient. But all I saw was who I am now. Calmer, heavier in some ways, lighter in others. The road dipped slightly, then rose again, and there it was. The water tower behind me, the park beside me, and the main street straight ahead. My pulse picked up, not from fear, but from recognition. This was the point of no return. Not because I couldn't turn around, but because I didn't want to. I slowed to a near stop. Let a car pass. Let the moment settle. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running and keep driving anyway. Main Street unfolded in front of me, shorter than I remembered, but still holding its shape. Storefronts lined both sides, some familiar, some completely new, some trying hard to look like they belonged. I passed the old diner, still there, still stubborn, still advertising the same breakfast special. That made me smile. Some things survive simply by refusing to change. I could almost taste the coffee. Strong, cheap, honest. I used to sit there early in the mornings, watching locals drift in, telling myself I was different, that I was meant for somewhere bigger. Now I understood. They weren't stuck. They were rooted. I slowed at the stop sign near the post office. Paint chipped, pole leaning slightly. That sign had seen a lot. Goodbyes, returns, promises made and broken. I rested my hands on the wheel and let myself breathe. There was no crowd, no spotlight, just a town living at its own pace. A couple crossed the street ahead of me, walking slow, in sync, not talking much. That kind of quiet togetherness used to scare me. Now it felt earned. I turned right, away from Main Street, toward the last stretch of road. My chest tightened again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was full. Because I knew whatever waited ahead wasn't asking anything from me, except honesty. The road narrowed again. No lines now, just memory guiding the way. Trees leaned closer on both sides, their shadows stretching across the windshield, like quiet reminders. This was the stretch I used to rush through, foot heavy on the gas, eyes fixed ahead, heart already somewhere else. Today, I slowed almost to a crawl. I noticed things I'd ignored before. A fence repaired with mismatched boards. A mailbox held together by faith and duct tape. Wind chimes singing off-key on a porch. Life wasn't polished here. It was lived. The house came into view slowly. No sudden reveal. No dramatic moment. Just there. Waiting. Exactly where it had always been. I pulled over across the street. Engine still running. Hands resting quietly in my lap. For a long moment, I didn't move. I let the years stack up between us. The leaving. The silence. The becoming someone else. The house didn't accuse me. Didn't welcome me either. It just stood there. Steady and unchanged. Like it trusted I'd show up eventually. I turned the engine off. The sudden quiet felt loud. I stepped out of the car slowly. Feet touching the ground I once swore I'd never stand on again. And as I closed the door, I realized, coming back wasn't the hard part. Standing still. That was. I stood there longer than necessary. Not frozen. Just listening. The house made its own sounds. A soft creak. A loose shutter tapping gently in the breeze. Nothing urgent. Nothing demanding. I crossed the street slowly. Each step feeling heavier than the last. Not because of fear, but because of meaning. Up close, the paint was more worn than I remembered. Not neglected. Just honest about its age. The porch steps dipped slightly in the middle. Right where I used to sit. Waiting for answers that never came. I rested my hand on the railing. The wood felt familiar. Rough. Reliable. For a second, I thought about turning back. Not because I wasn't ready, but because this moment felt complete already. Still, I climbed the steps. The front door stood quietly. No sign. No warning. No invitation. I reached for the knob and stopped. My reflection faintly visible in the glass. I whispered something under my breath. Not a prayer. Not an apology. More like a greeting. The door opened with a slow groan. As if it recognized me. Before I recognized myself. Inside, the air was cool and still. Dust floated lazily in the light. Time had been careful here. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. That sound. Soft, final, familiar. Echoed deeper than I expected. I was home again. The smell hit me first. Old wood. Faded curtains. And something like memory itself. It wasn't unpleasant. Just layered. Like years folded into the air. Light filtered through the windows in thin lines. Cutting the room into quiet pieces. I stood still, letting my eyes adjust. Letting my thoughts slow down to match the space. The floor creaked when I moved. Not loud. Just enough to remind me that this place was awake. I took a few steps forward. Each one echoing softly behind me. There was the living room. Smaller than I remembered. But warmer. Like it had been waiting without expectation. I could almost see the furniture. That no longer sat there. A couch near the wall. A chair by the window. That chair especially. It held a lot of silence once. The good kind. The kind that doesn't ask you to fill it. I ran my fingers along the wall. Cool paint. Familiar texture. This house knew every version of me. The impatient one. The hopeful one. The one who left. And now, the one who came back. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The past wasn't pressing in. It wasn't demanding attention. It was simply present. Like an old neighbor who nods at you from across the street and lets you decide if you want to stop and talk. I walked farther into the house, slow enough to hear my own breathing. The hallway felt longer now. Not stretched. Just unhurried. Pictures used to line these walls. Faces. Moments frozen mid-laugh. All gone now. Yet I could still name where each one hung. This one crooked. That one slightly too high. Funny how memory keeps better records than photographs. I stopped near the doorway to the kitchen. The doorway where arguments once started and ended without resolution. I smiled at that. Not every fight needed closure. Some just needed time. The kitchen itself was bare. Counters clean. Cabinets empty. But the light still fell the same way. Across the floor in the late afternoon. I remembered standing here once. Backpack on. Heart racing. Pretending I wasn't scared. I told myself leaving meant freedom. What I didn't understand then was that freedom also comes with a quiet kind of loneliness. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. For a moment, I could hear voices. Not clearly. Not painfully. Just echoes. Soft. Unfinished. I opened my eyes again and let the room be what it was now. The past didn't need reenacting. It only needed acknowledgement. I moved toward the back of the house. Drawn there without thinking. The door to the small bedroom stood half open. The one that had once been mine. I hesitated at the threshold. Some rooms hold more than furniture. They hold versions of yourself. You're not sure you're ready to meet again. I stepped inside anyway. The room was almost empty now. No posters. No desk. No signs of rebellion or dreams taped to the walls. Just space. Sunlight spilled through the window, warming the floor in a familiar square. I stood right in it, as if it had been saved for me. I remembered lying on that floor once, staring at the ceiling, imagining a future that felt very far away. Back then, everything was urgent. Every choice felt permanent. Now, standing here, I realized how wrong I'd been. Very few things are final. I ran my hand along the window frame. Paint chipped. Wood solid. Some foundations last longer than plans. I laughed quietly. Not out of sadness, but understanding. Leaving didn't erase this place. It shaped me. And coming back didn't undo my life. It completed a sentence I'd left unfinished. I stepped back into the hallway. The house felt different now. Not quieter. Not louder. Just aware. Like it knew I'd seen what I needed to see. I noticed a small door at the end of the hall. The closet under the stairs. The one nobody used much. I opened it slowly. Inside, the air felt cooler. Still. Almost respectful. A single cardboard box sat on the floor. Unlabeled. Unassuming. I crouched down, joints reminding me of their age, and lifted the lid carefully. Inside were things that didn't matter anymore. And one thing that did. Old notebooks. A cracked watch. Receipts from a lifelong past. At the bottom, a folded sheet of paper. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My chest tightened. Not painfully. Just enough to make me stop. I unfolded it slowly. It wasn't long. No explanations. No grand emotions. Just a few lines written in steady ink. If you ever come back, take your time. This place remembers you. I sat there on the floor for a long while. Not reading it again. Not moving. Some messages don't need repetition. They arrive exactly when you're ready to hear them. I folded the paper carefully and placed it back in the box. Then I closed the door to the closet. Gently. Some memories don't need to be carried forward. They only need to be acknowledged. I rose slowly and brushed the dust from my hands. My movements felt calmer now. The house seemed to exhale with me. Not in relief. In recognition. I walked back toward the living room. Steps softer than before. The light had shifted. Late afternoon leaning toward evening. Shadows longer. Edges gentler. I sat down on the floor. Back against the wall. Exactly where I used to sit on restless nights. I didn't check the time. Didn't need to. This place wasn't measuring minutes anymore. I thought about the life I'd lived since leaving. The good parts. The mistakes. The long stretches of just getting by. None of it felt wasted now. It all made sense in a way. It never had before. I realized something important then. Coming back hadn't changed the past. But it changed how I carried it. The weight was still there. But it sat differently. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The house answered with a soft creak. They were still talking to each other. After all these years. I smiled. Not because everything was resolved. But because it didn't need to be. Some chapters don't end with answers. They end with peace. I stayed there until the light faded. Until the house grew quiet again. And when I finally stood up, I knew. This wasn't goodbye. It was alignment. Evening settled in gently. No sudden darkness. Just a slow dimming of edges. I stood near the window and watched the street outside. A porch light clicked on across the road. Somewhere, a screen door closed softly. Life was happening again. Quietly. Without asking for my attention. I realized I was hungry. Not rushed hungry. Just aware hungry. That alone felt like progress. I walked into the kitchen and opened a cabinet. Empty. Another one. Empty again. I laughed under my breath. Of course it was empty. Still, I filled a glass with water and leaned against the counter. The sound of the tap echoed briefly, then disappeared. I drank slowly. The house didn't feel abandoned anymore. It felt paused. Like it had been waiting for the right moment to continue its story. I thought about staying the night. The idea surprised me. I hadn't planned on it. Hadn't packed for it. But some decisions don't need preparation. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No urgency. Good. I set it down face first on the counter. For once, nothing outside this house needed me more than what was inside. I walked back into the living room and sat again. Legs stretched out. Hands resting loosely in my lap. This time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. I wasn't here to fix anything. I wasn't here to decide the future. I was here to stay long enough to let the past settle properly. I found a blanket folded neatly in the hallway closet. Thin, but clean. It smelled like soap and air. Simple. Familiar. I carried it into the living room and spread it across the floor. No bed. No ceremony. Just enough comfort for the night. I lay back and stared at the ceiling. The same faint crack ran across it. Exactly where I remembered. Some things refuse to change. No matter how much time passes. My body felt heavier now. Not tired in a bad way. Just finally slowing down. I thought about the people I'd become since leaving. The roles I'd played. The expectations I'd carried. None of them were needed here. The house didn't care what I'd accomplished. Or failed at. It only recognized presence. Outside, night sounds took over. Crickets. A distant engine. A door closing somewhere far away. I pulled the blanket closer and exhaled. Sleep came quietly. No dreams. No replaying old scenes. Just rest. At some point, I woke briefly. Not startled. Just aware. Moonlight filled the room in soft shapes. I listened again. To the house. To myself. And for the first time in years, everything felt aligned. Morning arrived without noise. No alarm. No urgency. Light crept in through the windows. Slow and forgiving. I opened my eyes and stayed still for a while. Letting the day introduce itself. My body remembered the floor before my mind did. Then the ceiling. Then the place. I sat up slowly. Stretching joints that reminded me of their history. The house felt different in daylight. Less mysterious. more honest. Dust floated lazily in the sun. Nothing hidden. Nothing dramatic. I stood and walked to the window. The street looked peaceful. Unimpressed by my return. A neighbor watered their lawn. Someone waved. I waved back, surprised at myself. I hadn't planned on being seen. I drank the rest of the water from the glass. Now warm. And smiled. There was no rush to leave. No schedule pulling at me. That alone felt like a gift. I thought about the letter again. How it had brought me here. How little it had said. Some invitations don't explain themselves. They trust you'll understand eventually. I folded the blanket and placed it neatly on the chair. A small gesture. But this house understood small gestures. I took a deep breath. Feeling grounded in a way I hadn't in years. Whatever came next. I knew one thing. I wasn't running anymore. I stepped outside onto the porch. The morning air felt cool and unclaimed. The boards creaked under my weight, greeting me like they always had. I leaned against the railing and looked down the street. Same curve. Same quiet stretch of road. Time had passed. But it hadn't erased anything. A breeze moved through the trees. Leaves whispering softly above me. I closed my eyes for a moment. And let the sound settle. This was the kind of silence you don't notice until it's gone. I thought about how many mornings I'd rushed through life. Coffee in hand. Mind already elsewhere. Standing here now. There was nowhere else I needed to be. The house behind me felt steady. Not holding me back. Not pushing me forward. Just present. I realized then. Staying wasn't about retreating. It was about arriving. Arriving at myself. At the truth I'd been circling for years. I straightened up and took another deep breath. There would be conversations later. Decisions eventually. But not now. Now was for standing still. For letting the morning finish speaking. And as the sun climbed higher, I knew. This place hadn't waited for me out of obligation. It had waited. Because it could. I went back inside and closed the door gently. Not to shut anything out. But to hold the quiet in. The house felt warmer now. Not from heat. From familiarity. I walked through each room once more. Not searching. Just acknowledging. Here was the spot where laughter used to echo. Here was where voices lowered late at night. Here was where silence once felt uncomfortable. None of it hurt anymore. I realized something subtle but important. Memory changes when you stop fighting it. It softens. It rearranges itself. I paused near the front door. Keys resting loosely in my hand. For the first time since arriving, I didn't feel pulled in either direction. Leaving wouldn't feel like loss. Staying wouldn't feel like hiding. That balance felt new. Outside, the town continued its quiet routine. Mail trucks. Footsteps. Ordinary life. Inside, I felt steady. I placed the keys on the small table by the door. Not to make a statement. Just to free my hands. Whatever choice came next, it wouldn't be made out of fear. It would be made from clarity. I took one last look around. Not as someone returning. Not as someone leaving. But as someone who finally understood why this place mattered. I sat down on the front steps. The sun warm on my face. The street hummed softly now. Not loud. Just alive. I thought about calling someone. Anyone. Then I realized. This moment didn't need witnesses. Some understandings are meant to stay quiet. I watched shadows move across the yard. Slow. Unbothered. Time wasn't pushing anymore. I remembered how much pressure I used to feel. To explain myself. To justify choices. To prove something. Sitting there now. None of that mattered. I didn't need permission to feel settled. I smiled to myself. A small, private thing. Whatever came next. Selling the house. Keeping it. Coming back again someday. It would be handled. When it needed to be. Not now. For now. It was enough to sit in the sun. Listen to the street. And let the past rest properly. I stood up slowly. And brushed my hands together. The house remained behind me. Steady and patient. And as I stepped off the porch, I knew I wasn't leaving something behind. I was carrying it. The right way this time. The town felt different as I walked back toward the car. Not changed. Just newly familiar. Like seeing an old photograph. And finally noticing the background. I drove slowly, windows down. Letting the air move through the car. There was no destination in mind. No urgency. I stopped near the edge of town. Where the road opens up. And decisions usually begin. I turned the engine off and sat there for a while. Hands resting on the wheel. Breathing evenly. I thought about the life waiting for me elsewhere. Responsibilities. Commitments. People who knew only the version of me I'd become. That life wasn't wrong. It just wasn't complete on its own. Coming back here hadn't undone anything. It had added context. Like rereading the first chapter of a book. After finishing the middle, things finally made sense. I realized then. Home isn't always a place you stay. Sometimes it's a place that gives you permission to move forward. Without carrying so much weight. I started the engine again. Not with hesitation. But intention. The road ahead felt open. Not demanding. Not empty. Just available. And as I pulled away, I carried something quieter than nostalgia. I carried peace. The highway came back into view. Wide, loud, familiar. Traffic moved faster here. Purposeful. Impatient. I merged in smoothly. Not fighting the pace. Not surrendering to it either. The town disappeared in the rearview mirror. Not suddenly, but gradually. I didn't look back again. Some goodbyes don't need a second glance. Music played softly on the radio. Nothing memorable. Just enough to keep company. I thought about how this trip would sound if I told someone about it. The drive. The house. The quiet. Most people would nod politely and miss the point. And that was okay. Not every experience needs translation. As miles passed, I felt lighter. Not younger. Just less tangled. I stopped for gas and stood there a moment, watching people come and go. Everyone carrying their own version of a story they'd probably never tell fully. I smiled at that. We're all walking chapters, crossing paths briefly, then continuing on. I got back in the car and checked the time. More than enough day left. For the first time in a long while. I wasn't racing it. I was moving with it. The road stretched ahead. Smooth and predictable now. The kind of drive where thoughts settle into order. I found myself thinking less about the house and more about what came next. Not in a planning way. Just noticing. The future didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt open. I thought about small changes. Calling people more often. Letting silences stay silent. Listening instead of filling space. None of it felt dramatic. Just kinder. The sky shifted as the afternoon passed. Clouds drifting without purpose. I liked that. Not everything needs direction. I realized how often I'd been chasing momentum, mistaking motion for meaning. This trip had been slow, deliberate, and somehow more productive than years of rushing. I rested my arm on the window frame and let the wind brush past. For the first time, I wasn't measuring life by milestones. I was measuring it by moments that felt true. The house at the end of the road would stay where it was. It didn't need me to hold on to it. It had already done its job. It reminded me who I was before I learned to be anyone else. That felt like enough. The sun dipped lower as the miles added up. Late afternoon turning everything softer. I rolled the window up and let the quiet return. Not silence. Just less noise. I noticed how steady my breathing had become. No tightness. No rush. That surprised me. For years, I'd carried a low hum of tension, without even realizing it was there. Now, it was gone. I thought about how rarely we pause long enough to hear ourselves clearly. Life keeps talking. Jobs talk. Expectations talk. Old fears talk. But stillness listens. This trip hadn't given me answers. It had given me space. Space to set things down. Space to stop replaying conversations that ended years ago. I understood something then. Closure doesn't always come from resolution. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. Accepting that the past shaped you without owning you. Accepting that you can carry gratitude without carrying weight. The road signs flashed by, pointing toward familiar destinations. For once, they didn't feel like demands, just directions. I smiled again. Not for anyone else, just for myself. Some journeys don't change where you go. They change how you arrive. By the time evening settled in, the sky painted itself in quiet colors. I pulled into a rest stop and turned the engine off. Not because I needed to stop, but because I wanted to. I stepped out and stretched slowly, feeling grounded in my body. A few people sat on benches nearby. Strangers. All of us pausing for different reasons. I sat down and watched the horizon until the light thinned out. There was no urge to check my phone. No pull to hurry. I felt complete in a way that didn't need explanation. The house. The town. The drive. They had given me something simple and surprisingly rare. Permission to be at ease with myself. I stood up again, brushed off my hands, and headed back to the car. The night road waited patiently. As I pulled back onto the highway, I realized some places don't hold you. They release you at exactly the right moment. Night wrapped itself around the road, headlights carving a narrow path forward. The world beyond the windshield disappeared, leaving only what mattered now. I drove in comfortable silence. No music. No distractions. Just movement and thought. Balanced at last. I knew I'd return to routine soon. Responsibilities would resume. Life would pick up its usual pace. But something had shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. The kind of change that doesn't announce itself, but shows up later. In how you speak. How you listen. How you rest. The house at the end of that road would remain behind me. Not as something unfinished, but as something understood. I didn't need to go back again to prove anything. I carried what I needed now. The road continued, steady and sure. And as the miles disappeared beneath the tires, I felt something settle permanently. Not nostalgia. Not regret. Peace. Sometimes, that's the real ending. Not a conclusion, but a calm place to stop thinking and simply be.